Now, for those of you who follow this channel, obviously for dating tips and whatnot, there's two ways that I kind of look at this, so hear me out. You look at this from a sales aspect, right? There's two parts to a sale. You have the product that the person is buying, but then you have the pitch. Okay, the sales pitch is the words coming out of your mouth. So some of you guys, okay, maybe you have great social skills, but you need to work on the product, which is you, right? Other people, you do good at working on the product, which is you, but you don't convey it in the best light, okay? That's why I say oftentimes women are more attracted to illusions of value, right? How you portray yourself instead of real world value. Because if you have the best product in the world, but you don't advertise it properly, right? Like if you don't advertise it properly, nobody sees it, nobody hears about it, nobody buys it, right? So you need both sides of the coin. So, I mean, you know, like for 10 years, I've constantly dialed in my nutrition, dialed in my workouts, you know, made it a point to get good sleep. Have not drank alcohol more than a handful of times in the past 10 years, right? So all these things add up and it compounds. And as it compounds, you become like a stronger person with what I would say better, you know, masculine frame, if you want to call it that. But the truth is every person still has to convey themselves properly, so you have to work on both. Now, those of you with more masculine personality traits, you are going to gravitate more towards order and building yourself, and you're going to gravitate towards working on the product, which is you. So you're going to be all about, you know, self-improvement and all that good stuff. And then those of you who have more social characteristics, those of you who have more feminine personality traits or characteristics, are going to typically be more social, right? And you like to focus on meeting people and all that good stuff, you know, but the flip side of that is from time to time, maybe your, you know, personal life might suffer. So you have to have a balance of both. Like you need to get good at both. I know a lot of guys who have tons of order in their life and they're very successful. They're maybe good looking, they're built well, they make a lot of money. But let's say they don't convey themselves the right way, they don't attract anybody, right? You know, meanwhile, on the flip side, there's certain men out there who have wild social lives that's amazing, but past the first couple dates, when the girl sees that this guy doesn't have a whole hell of a lot going on for himself, she's like, I need to find a better product, aka the man, right? So you got to do both. You got to build the man, and you're going to have to learn how to convey that properly through what I would call illusions of value, as well as mastering, learning, and understanding the language of women. So for those of you too, who are like, well, why do we got to do all this shit? Why can't we just live and exist and date and it's easy? Well, I have a newsflash for you. It's never going to be like that, because we live in a world that is not as basic and primal, right? We live in a world where status plays a role, social media plays a role. A lot of times we live in cities where different environments play into every single situation, and the world is obviously different. So because of that, like, here's the thing too. If you've seen, I'm not a fucking scientist, right? So don't quote me. I don't know this shit like the back of my hand, but I've seen science type stuff. I literally almost just got hit by a Mercedes. I've seen science type stuff, right? That say certain animals or, you know, fish or things in the ocean, whatever, have had to adapt and evolve over time, right? So there's certain adaptation tendencies and characteristics that animals have had through a lot of years, right? Maybe hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, right? But they have had to develop in some way, shape, or form. That's almost like survival of the fittest, right? Like the animal has to adapt and grow to survive its environment. As a human, I think that our world is pretty much the exact same as that, right? So, you know, in 50 years from now, who the hell knows how dating apps and social media will look like? Who knows, right? who knows how the world will look. But the truth is, the guys who are willing to adapt to their environment and grow are typically the ones who are selected. So the whole premise of the language of women, like for those of you who have been, let's just call it for what it is, like you see me talk about this community every day and maybe you're skeptical or whatever the case may be, and you're like, what the hell is this? Okay, the whole premise of the language of women is understanding how to get her to want to come to you first, or at least start to show subtle signs that she's interested. So this works a lot better than just you randomly going up and cold approaching random girls to talk to them or whatever the case may be, because you're setting up the right environment for attraction to actually happen. So when you go up and you talk to a random person, like there's no assumed interest. And yes, some of you might be captivating enough to like win over her emotions and she likes you, but like, let's call this for what it is. Hypergamy satisfied when like she feels as if it's a win for her. So what that means is like women oftentimes want what they can't have or fall in love with what they can't have or what appears to be hard to get. Because of that, as soon as you start even saying hello, giving any interest, right? At some point, you do lose a little bit of leverage. And that's just how it's going to be. So everybody has their own method, right? The reason why I developed my way or method or system, what I call the language of women, is I pretty much dedicated my whole life to this over the past 10 years. Since I was 18, I'm 28 right now. Figuring this stuff out, figuring out how, different social nuances, different dynamics work. And after testing all of this, this is what I've found to have worked best, okay? So I believe in a blend of the right words, aka the pitch, mixed with the right product, aka the man, right? And you need both. If you have both, you start to become almost unstoppable, because a lot of guys don't focus on everything, or they're not able to see this from like a 30,000 foot overview to see all of the little pieces going on, right? So some people talk about looks maxing. Does looks matter? Yes, of course. Some people talk about style. Does style matter? Yes, of course. Some people talk about fitness. Does fitness matter? Yes, of course. Some people talk about, it depends how tall you are to develop attraction. Does how tall you are matter? Yes, of course. Does how much money you make matter? Yes, of course. Does how big of social circle you have matter? Yes, of course. Everything matters. Does it matter how good you are in bed? Yes, of course. Like everything matters. So the problem when people say this is the way, or just do this, or here's how you dial in your approach, it's like, okay, from what I've found from my own experience of dating, I know guys who are great at approaching girls, great at talking, great at communicating. And some of these people, or some of these guys, right, are absolutely terrible at retaining the relationship or the interaction, right? So that's not what I want. Like, I want you to have every piece of the puzzle figured out, because here's the truth. What I have found through doing this myself over the past 10 years is that none of this is correlated. Meaning you maybe are great at approaching girls, but a lot of times that has nothing to do with if you're able to retain the woman's attraction in the relationship long term. Meanwhile, I know some guys who are great in relationships, and once the girl somehow meets the guy, he's charming and captivating and has a great life for himself, and she wants to be by his side. However, those same guys, sometimes it's extremely hard for them to go out and meet new people. And just because you have one piece of the skill set dialed in does not mean that you have the other. So what I found is that none of it is correlated. Guys who are really good at going out to bars and clubs and talking to a bunch of women, that is a totally different skill set than if, let's say, you have a girl you're dating or a girl you're brand new in a relationship with, her coming over to your house and hanging out with you for 2 hours, where let's say you have to be one-to-one with her and she's sitting there getting to know you, and like, are you able to still hold those proper emotions that build the right kind of relationship tension? All of this is different, right? It's all different skill sets. So since it's all different skill sets, you have to work and you have to focus on everything okay? And when you see this from a 30,000 foot overview and you can see all of the little pieces, this is what I call the language of women. So what I did with my system is I developed it into 3 phases. The first phase I call front end game, front end. What are you going to do on the front end when you first see the woman, meet the woman? How do you get her interested in you so that way you can attract her? Okay, so notice I did not say pursue her, I said get yourself to attract her, okay? This is going to be done through captivating the right kind of attention, your style, your aura, your fashion sense, your social circle, everything that makes you you, okay? You want to be able to go to a social event, a bar, whatever the case may be. You sit down with your friends, and because of who you are, okay, in a perfect world, if you master front end game properly with captivating the right kind of attention, you want her to be able to use what I would call her femininity with indirect sentences is typically how it goes. They will ask you something indirect. Hey, is anybody sitting here? Hey, can I grab this chair? Hey, I love your hat. Okay, it's something so subtle. This is her, what I would call making the approach first. That's front end game. I want them to show some interest first, okay? And if you can do that, the leverage is now more towards you because you appear as if you're selected. Okay, that's number 1. Now, number 2, mid game or middle game, right? What do you do the first 1 to 3 dates? The first 1 to 3 dates, you are actually signaling potential disinterest, okay? So you're doing things like maybe being short with your sentences. You don't really necessarily seem to care what's going on around you. And you're there feeling out the situation, feeling out how the girl's behavior is, feeling out, the date, but you don't necessarily care if it goes anywhere. So you're going to slightly withhold your interest level. The first 1 to 3 dates is important because this is where she's going to start to really gauge your SMV. And because of that, if you seem like you're super excited, you're super into her, it's not going to work. You need to come from a point where this is even playing ground. And because of that, you slowly start to win her over and she questions why you're so indifferent towards her. So that's how you work things in the middle, the first 1 to 3 dates. Now, back end game. Back end game is more, you've been dating the girl for a couple months or a few months, or you guys have been dating for a year, something like that. Maybe you're in a long-term relationship. This is where you are pretty much leading everything. She has entered your world, your frame, and you're essentially almost like the masculine type, what I would even call maybe like the father figure, right? Is like you're so centered and solid and congruent with your own identity and your own world. She sees that she can't move you. You are how you are, because here's what you have to understand. Through all of this, front end game, middle game or mid game, and back end game, what you're going to be getting the entire time is a series of interest tests, because she always wants to see she always wants to see if you are going weak for her and if you're overly invested. So she's constantly going to be testing your interest level. So throughout all of the different stages, you have to pass these interest tests to satisfy hypergamy. So that's what the whole premise of the language of women is satisfying hypergamy at every stage. Because over the past 10 years as I've dated girls, I would always get confused why certain things would happen at every interaction. And then I realized, hey, my demeanor, my attitude during back end game, let's say if I was dating a girl for 6 months to a year, that is completely different than your social skills and the dynamic when you first meet the woman when you're out. Okay, so you have to have each point dialed in. Same thing with bodybuilding. If you do a legs, push, pull, split, you have to have each phase of your workout routine dialed in. This is the exact same thing. The more regimen and order you can apply to this stuff a little bit in the beginning here to start to comprehend this, the easier it gets, because you can use some logic, like step-by-step processes, right? First do this, now do this, now do this, now do this, now do this. I'm a systems guy, right? That's why I teach on a marker board. I want to see step 1, I do this. Now I need to know this. Now I do this. And that's why I created this, because I looked at every single experience I've had over the past 10 years, I systemized it and built it. Now, everything I do and everything I have built for a reason. So one of the ways why I believe the things that I believe and I teach the things that I teach with front end game on the front end when you first meet the girl is because here's the thing. If I have to be at an 8 out of 10 charisma level or social level or confidence level, good luck having me or anybody hold that woman's attention multiple dates and like long term. Because if you have to rely so heavily on these big social skills and having this big captivating personality, if I have to be at an 8 out of 10 charisma level, well, that's her expectation from the get-go of my personality, of how I am. And if that's what it takes for her to have romantic interest in me, that's going to be very hard to keep that up when her emotional state was pumped higher and higher just to get her to have romantic interest in you. So instead, I would rather demonstrate front-end game properly so she wants to meet me in certain ways, so that way the attraction does majority of the heavy lifting for me. Okay, so I'd prefer to be at a 2 out of 10 charisma level so that way I don't have to try very hard for her to have romantic interest in me, and that way it's much easier to sustain her interest level because it's more based in raw, genuine desire instead of some type of strategies of saying the right lines to create an emotional spark. So that's why I developed this stuff, because at each point of every interaction over the past 10 years, front end game, mid game, and back end game, I would notice flaws in each where like, hey, why does this work at this point but it doesn't over here? And why does this work, you know, when you're in a relationship with a girl, but this is not the right dynamic and frame when you first meet her? And all these little things matter.